Hi, everybody. Welcome to Gig. I'm your host, Mike Redman. Here we are again with Mark Bonilla, Part 2. The short version is he's an incredible guitarist, artist, and human, so we won't waste time with a lot of introduction on this one. Let's just jump in. But I want to jump to a totally different thing and how you kind of came into my path, and it's through Steve Porcaro, Toto fame, and I was watching Justified. Who did I just interview last week? Michael Dinner.
Oh yeah,
and Graham Yost, and
I love Graham. Graham's a huge prog fan, by the way, huge progressive. I'll tell you a story about. Let me tell you a story about him because
let's tell everybody who he is. He's a executive producer, writer, showrunner in Hollywood. He's important enough that when I was on the phone with him one day, he says, "Hey, Mike, I'll be back. It's Tom calling." And it was Tom Hanks to talk about a new show. So go ahead.
So Graham, yes. Okay. So that's good that you say that because it prefaces the fact that he is a very big player in Hollywood, right? And just nothing but quality work. I mean, everything that he's done from Mr. In Between to Band of Brothers, all things, you're getting a quality show and quality writing, all of that with him, right? And God bless him. He was the showrunner on Justified and was running interference for everybody on the, for some reason when you're an executive, for some reason, when they give you a desk and a secretary and your name on the window, they automatically think they've been imbued with musical insight. It's not the case. All right. So, but they think it is, and they have to justify their salary. So they like to render their opinions. And oftentimes there would be conflicting opinions on the same cue that Steve and I would be working on. Yeah. Like, this needs more of that. And the other guy goes, no, it needs less of that, And so Graham came to us early on and he says, look, you guys are doing great work. The people are raving about the soundtrack. Don't you worry about that. I'll handle those guys. He was our firewall throughout the all the seasons that we did Justified. So I can't say enough good things about this gentleman. He was a huge prog fan, like I said, a huge Emerson fan, Keith Emerson fan. So Steve had called one day. He goes, "Hey man, do you think that maybe you could talk Keith into going out to dinner because Graham is coming down with his brother from Canada, and I know they would love. It'd be totally great if they could meet him." And I said, "Let me call Keith." And I called Keith and I explained to him, and he goes, "Oh yeah, no problem." So we went out to dinner. Now these guys, Graham, Hollywood player, right? He's literally doing a Chris Farley interviewing Paul McCartney. Where he's sitting on his hands, he can't sit still, and he's like, so Keith, like when you were doing Lucky Man, like that, yeah, total fanboy. I loved it. It was like, and we're all that. The thing is, given the right person with John Lennon, it was Chuck Berry. John couldn't sit still on the Mike Douglas show. He's just grabbing his props the whole time. I can't believe it's Chuck. It walks and it talks. And it's so. Both Graham and his brother and Keith was completely cool with all. He answered every question. We closed the club. Everybody had gone, and we were the only table left. They were sweeping. All of that stuff. So it was great to see that even guys like Graham, they're fanboys. Something really. We all have our heroes. Doesn't matter what we do in life because to us, we're just the same people we always were. But other people see us differently. We're not. We're just kids. All of us. And it was so great to see that. It was so great to see. And actually, Keith did a piece. Actually, I surprised Graham. I had Keith do a piano piece for one of the ending cues in Justified.
Oh, no kidding! No kidding.
Yeah, so he's in there. I can't remember what it was called. It was like Escape from something. It's a train thing, and he's playing the piano on it. And we said, by the way, that's Keith playing piano. We went, it was great.
That's so cool.
He's a phenomenal human being. And so, so Justified.
So Justified, awesome show. I'm hoping that everybody that listens to this has seen it. If they haven't, they probably should. And then you have City Primeval. So the new show. But Steve was working on that project, and I started watching it. And the first thing that stuck out to me was, the style of the score. But the first thing that really stuck out to me was the guitar work. And being a composer myself and a guitarist, I thought, you do not write this stuff. You know what I mean? You know, when you're writing a score, you don't write that. The guy that's playing guitars on this is fucking, excuse my language, but he's fucking amazing. It was so well layered. The recording itself was so nice. And I used to just enjoy listening to the score just as much, or if not more, than the show. I shouldn't say if not more. But and then that's when I asked Steve. I said, "So man, who played guitars on this?" He goes, Mark Bonilla. And I'm like, well, I've heard his name, but I've never really, I'm an East Coast guy, Never, we don't commingle.
Never the twain shall meet.
Yeah, we don't commingle with those West Coast guys, even though I lived in San Francisco. And that's when I asked him if he'd put us together, and he was, really gracious about it. But would you walk, because this is a different kind of your different part of your world, would you walk somebody through that might be listening to this that may think, hey, I want to play guitar, I want to do scores and TV shows and stuff, kind of what just the process is, it's of doing, being involved in a TV show?
Mm-hmm. Well, obviously it makes a difference who your showrunner is, the guy that, a girl that runs the entire event, how much confidence do they have in your ability to trust what you have? And that's why a lot of directors will keep with the same composer throughout different series and different films, because they know they trust their baby being handled by someone else, without any negative surprises. So that being a given, even if it's new, you need to be able to obviously understand the role of soundtrack music, and usually you have to become, in parts, you're always it's another character. In other words, with regard to Justified, we had Raylan Givens, who was the sheriff, and
Boyd,
the marshal rather, and so I try to assign an instrument to each character, much like, remember Peter and the Wolf? You listen to Peter and the Wolf by Prokofiev. Every character had an instrument, right? Mm-hmm. You have to be able to. So I would assign a role. I would also keep in mind what the scene is about. In other words, what's the motivation of the scene? Because you're always a character in that role. Now, there are supporting characters that happen that are not in every scene, but they're important to the story. You are in, a lot of the scenes. Sometimes you go, we don't need music here. It would distract, because once you put music in, there's a separation of reality. There becomes a veil that is pushed over the music, or what the music does, where it's more philosophical now, or it's now generating a different motivation than what's actually being said. That's why some scenes you don't want any music behind, because it's crucial that it's dead reality. And once you put music in, it separates you somehow.
Yeah.
And whether it's, if you're in a horror film and you what you always find is, you get the low drone and the ominous as they're walking through the house, but that it's not ready for the shock yet, or the guy's not going to come out because there's music playing, right? Once the music stops and there's this silence, then bam, then you get that anticipation, right? And that's the absence of music is just as important as the presence of music. And so as a music composer in soundtrack, you have to understand where those are, and realize that you don't want to detract from the script. You don't want to detract from the acting. You don't want to detract from the cinematography, any of that stuff. You want to add to it, and you sometimes have to slip in behind it and sneak in and become musical tofu, where you're absorbing the flavor of the scene, but you're not imposing your will. Because a lot of times if you're listening, and then if there's an action scene, yes, then of course you're gonna pull up and you're gonna do all those things, because now the dialogue's not what's important as much as the action. Then you can always add to the kinetic feel of that, or you can play against it, what they call playing against it, like the scene in Platoon when you have Willem Dafoe running out of the forest, and you have all of these, you have helicopter fire coming in and killing all the Viet Cong behind him, and he's doing this number, and you get Samuel Barber's Adagio for strings playing over it, which completely tells you about the tragedy of war as opposed to the action of war. So you as a composer have you have a lot of power when it comes to how a scene is interpreted, but you have to be really understand the script, the characters, the motivation, the arc of the story, all of those things before you even put pen to paper or all of that stuff. You really need to watch it and understand where you're needed and where you're not needed. It's different than if you're just playing and everything's standing on its own. You have to play in tandem with the script, the acting, the lighting, the cinematography, all of those things. And usually you're the last one that's been given the baton. So when you're running that relay race, and it starts out with production, and then they hand it off to editing, and then they hand it off to color correction, then they hand it off to this. You're the last guy, man. You're the last guy. And because of that, the time it gets compressed because a lot of times stuff doesn't get done in time. They have to do reshoots. So you don't get it. With all of that wonderful time that all the other ones had to produce it as much. So it doesn't matter how long a time it has to broadcast on a particular day. You need to get your ass around that track quick. So in order to do that, it's stressful. It's very stressful, but you have to, again, understand that this stuff comes through you. Every week that we started a new episode, we knew we had to hand it in at the end of the week, right? It didn't matter how much music or how less we knew we had to get it done. It was a blank canvas every time. And what I would do and how I would come up with stuff is I would watch it, watch it 2 or 3 times, the episode to get a feel for it. We have cue sheets that had where, you're 1 of 1, 1 of 2, all where they wanted the music.
Yeah.
Which is
they're spotting charts.
Yeah. And I would then go in, because we did this in the fall. I would go in and sit and watch NFL. I'd be in there, with my guitar. I'd be watching the Raiders, and I'd be playing away mindlessly, not concentrating on what I'm doing. Yeah. And all of a sudden, pause, digital recorder over here. Click. Click. Okay, back to the game. And I would sit there and watch, all Sunday. I would get riffs and things that I knew, that would be great in this part, or that would be great in here. The good places for the ideas to then germinate, but it was done through flow. It was all flow. I wasn't thinking about it. Yeah. And then I would go in and see where that stuff could fit. And then, okay, that can fit here, but we have a gap here where that won't fit. I'll write something now. So you were still flowing in the other room in the studio. But often I would get the themes from people by it's a form of meditation. Yeah. This is why when you're driving, you'll get ideas, right? You go, oh God, I got to write that down. You're driving, you're trying to do it in your phone, whatever it is. When you're running, when you're doing something that is a one purpose that you're doing, like it could be exercising, running, and that stuff. It's a form of meditation. You're not thinking about the other stuff. And that's when your ideas come in, because you basically unkink the hose, the water, and it all shoots out, and that's what we do. And so you have to find the ways to unkink your hose and to let the stuff flow through you. And by the end of the week, you'll have what you need, and then you can go in and tool things and make things hit on a certain cut, all of those things. You use both sides of your brains when you're doing soundtrack stuff. You're mathematical and you're creative. So
that's awesome. So when you're doing this particular show, were you writing a lot of times just right next to Steve, or were you guys bringing ideas? We did that. He would give me, he said, I'm going to take these, you take these. Okay.
And sometimes, and then of course, Steve, keyboard player, he's got 10 fingers, right? He writes an acoustic guitar part, 10 fingers, and I have to try to do here. I was like, impossible to play, right? Amazing to listen to, right? I would have to literally go in there on some of the stuff that he wrote to give me to play. Like I have this guitar thing, which are always, it was amazing. He was so good at that. He had such good instincts as far as guitaristic approach. It never sounded like a keyboard player playing an acoustic guitar. It sounded like just an amazing acoustic guitar player. So I was able to then, through editing and
Mm-hmm.
retuning, to
Mm-hmm.
get those things to sound
Oh,
so that certain notes would ring through. Because, when you're doing this, you have clusters that ring where you
yeah.
only have six strings to ring.
Mm-hmm.
So I would have to, it was meticulous some of the time of going in and layering those things and jacking them around so that I did justice to his composition, which was, I would curse his name while we were doing it.
Oh yeah, Justice on Justified. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
that's
But after I was done, I would praise him for that. Like, damn, great, but you're a cunt. You're having to do that kind of
yeah.
shit to me, it's terrible. So it was just one of those things where he was always writing great stuff, and then I would write, whatever. Let's say, well, just for the sake of argument, like 50% here, I
Yeah.
would write 50%, he would write 50%, and then I would give those to him, and he would go, "Oh man, I'm going to put this thing over the top of that." So in that way, we cross pollinated.
Gotcha.
But we knew that we're the kind of guys that we can get together to generate something
Yeah.
and get ideas across. Then we go, okay, we're going to piss off now. We're going to go to our separate caves and do our thing
Mm-hmm.
without interruption, and
Yep.
then come back and see. And that's how we worked, and we worked beautifully like
Oh
that.
man, I thought that you would never hear that. That's absolutely. I mean, it's interesting to me that what you just described. You should have written some things with 20 finger piano parts. But you. I'll tell you, man. I was blown away. I mean, you're
Well,
so articulate and precise in your acoustic playing, which I'm just hands down the worst acoustic guitarist ever put on this planet. But I sure could appreciate it. It was just a compliment. Just that one of those. That I
yeah.
hear you. It's pretty
Well,
just
it's and
amazing.
for me too. And remember this also, that you want to see. For me, I was forced to learn banjo. I was forced to learn,
Oh, me too.
mandolin,
Uh huh.
blues harp. I did all that. I just went out and bought that stuff. So I'm going to need it for this show. You
Yeah.
know,
Yeah. Yeah.
Steve was caught by surprise. Because he was doing this. So all of a sudden, there was all this guitar stuff that he calls me up. He goes, "Dude, you got to help me, man, because." They want a lot of guitar on this. I said, fine, let's
Yeah.
do it. But I
Yeah.
had to push myself in certain areas because it was, for one, it was cheaper, and because I could just get it done. We
Yeah.
wouldn't have to wait to hire somebody. We did hire. We had proper
Yeah.
fiddle,
Sure.
all that. But we would, again, I just decided to do things myself, learn things myself, and I did accordion, whatever it was. I had Keith's accordion over there, and so I would play
Wow.
that. And a lot of times, getting out of your comfort zone, you don't play the same eddies and currents of stuff
Mm.
that you know how to play. So you come out with things that are maybe a little bit unorthodox, definitely less busy because you don't have the chops to do anything impressive, but much better for the soundtrack stuff. So I was pushing myself in ways that I really hadn't gone, which is the whole point.
Yeah.
Go somewhere where you haven't been, and you'll be able to catch that edge of discovery on a soundtrack. You know.
Wow. That is awesome. I just got a couple more things. I think this is definitely going to be 2 episodes. And I like this. I think that's cool. Let's just for a second. Let's go way back to Toy Matinee.
Mhm.
I'm like I said, I'm an East Coast guy. I lived north of San Francisco for about 8 years, but really, on the East Coast we had our bands. You guys had your bands out there, sort of. And Toy Matinee was a big West Coast band. Most people that I've talked to recently, because I was actually thinking about this, they said nobody had ever heard of them. But I had a friend that was selling studios in Marina Del Rey. We had a studio here, and he sent me this something with Toy Matinee one day, and he goes, "This is one of the bands I hear that's cool." And I was so blown away by that band. I listened to them every day for weeks. I mean, because for lots of different reasons. A lot of the music I wrote was Steely Dan-esque progressive stuff, and
Yeah.
and Toy Matinee was one that just blew my friggin' mind. And I just listened to it yesterday. Some of the tracks that you guys did, where somebody resynced the YouTube video to
Oh
music.
yeah.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
tell
that
you
was
what.
quite impressive, the fact that
Oh
they
my
did.
God. And you guys you were so friggin' tight live. I
Yeah.
mean, do you want to, what was my question? I guess, what's some of your most memorable moments of playing at that time? And maybe, something about the genius behind Kevin Gilbert and,
Well,
you
Kevin
know,
and I met through Keith Emerson.
hmm
Keith brought me to the studio back in San Jose, and Kevin didn't know who the hell I was. And But the fact that Keith brought me in, and I had just met Keith like 2 days before that.
Really?
So, yeah, that's a story in its own. But going to Kevin's, studio, and we were at Robert Berry's studio, and we played something. I played something. He said, "All right, come on in." And he was with his arms folded, and like, "Okay, let's see what you have." And whatever I played, and I don't know what it was, he went, "Oh," he said, "Play that again immediately, exactly that." And he hit the record button. So I guess whatever it was is exactly what he was hearing.
Yeah.
So that was the first. I got like the first perk that way. And we went out to dinner that night. And we were talking around the table about reverb in music these days and how there's too much of it. We were really into like dry stuff, and like the early Yes albums, where you heard it in the studio and they were just so tight and everything. And I said, nowadays, with the glam rock, all this stuff, it sounds like it basically sounds like the last 10 or like last 15 seconds of Pleasant Valley Sunday, which
well, it's everything swimming,
where everything is like, and he goes, "My God," because I use that example. I say exactly that. I say, Pleasant Valley, I say exactly. What, are you a Monkees fan? I went, "Oh man, I love them." I went, "Meet the Monkees," the second Monkees, Headquarters, Birds and Bees, the Monkees. Yeah. And he goes, "I can't believe it." I know. Says, "I had to play that shit in my class." I said, "Me too," along with my Tiny Tim record. I get it. But we were also into Gentle Giant. So we bonded immediately after that.
Wow, that's cool.
And we basically had the same, pretty much the same vinyl collection. Mm-hmm. He went back to LA. I stayed up in the Bay Area, but we were calling each other all the time. And 4 or 5 hour calls, just talking about whatever.
Yeah.
Getting to know each other. And I decided at the time I was working with Ronnie Montrose on my first solo album for Guitar for the Practicing Musician. Ronnie was my mentor growing up from high school on out. And he financed me because he said, "I got to get you out of these nightclubs, man. I got to get you, you need a shot, No,
that's
nice. So we went, so I said, Kevin, I want you to produce this album, And so he said, "Well, move down here or come down, to my place in Studio City, Sherman Oaks, and we'll just do it." And so we went to his place. And he had completely converted his complete living room into a studio without telling his landlord. Oops. And we went to Pat Leonard's studio, Johnny Yuma, to record the drums. Troy Laquetta did the drums, and Don Frank did the drums there. And Keith came down to play piano on White Noise, so he was there. And then we did the rest of it at Kev's living room, which is why it says on the record, recorded in Kev's living room. And we got to know each other really well, and we were spending basically every minute, that whole summer. And he said at the end, he says, "Hey, look, they want us to go out and promote this Toy Matinee record, and could you go out and tour Japan with me, just a trio, or not trio, but a duo?" Excuse me. So I said, "Yeah." Hold on one second. Let me get some water here.
Yeah.
He said, "Yeah, I'll." I guess I must have inhaled a cat fur. Anyway, whatever it was. Okay, so he said, "Yeah, let's go to Japan." So we did. We came back. We added Spencer Campbell, and we did a radio tour. And then we came back and we added Toss Panos and Sheryl Crow, and we went out and toured. But it was great because Kevin, to me, was like a musical brother, closer than I had ever had. As far as things we heard together, the sense of humor, all of that stuff. I had never met anyone up to that point that I felt I had to play up to. It was great. I was always kind of like, "Come on, guys, you don't hear the, where I was up in the Bay Area. I always felt like I don't take this the wrong way, but the smartest guy in the room, meaning I try to get these other guys to play shit, and they just didn't hear it, or they couldn't, they didn't understand it. And I didn't consider myself smart. It was just like, they're not hearing what I'm hearing. But Kevin was the first person that I worked with that heard exactly what I was hearing and would raise, so we would raise and call each other. And Keith Emerson was the same way after that. We had a relationship like that too. They're very rare in your career or in your life where you find it's like your best man, for your wedding. It's that kind of thing where you guys just you're born out of the same DNA substance. And although there are differences, and that's what was great too, is the fact that I learned a lot from Kevin. Hopefully he learned something from me. Definitely learned things from Keith, but so it was just a great time where we were hitting on all cylinders, and it was cool. I just it was, yeah. I mean, there were so many different times that I could recite, but that was kind of the basic.
Thank you. That's I appreciate you sharing that, because I'm gonna put this out, and when we put this out, I want to make sure there's a few links in there so people can find out, listen to a band like that was cut off too short, but was
well. And full
amazing,
credit to the guys that actually did the studio album, Tim Pierce. And this is one thing I always would try to tell people, like, hey, you were great on the Toy Matinee. I was like, no, I didn't do the Toy Matinee. I did the live.
Yeah.
I did the live. Tim Pierce did the studio stuff, okay? Because I would get irked, and I don't know how Tim felt about it, because I'm sure people said, oh, Bonilla's saying that he was like, no, I never, I would never, no.
We'll make that clear. Well, maybe if I put a video version of this out, I'll make sure I put it right at them. Did not play on the album.
Did not play. I repeat, did not play.
I played his parts.
Yeah, no, because Tim's guitar playing was just phenomenal, and Guy Pratt,
absolutely,
and Brian McLeod, who actually Ronnie Montrose introduced us when he lived up in the Bay Area, and he and I again connected a big time up there and had a band together before coming down here. So the fact that Brian was, I said, hey, how you been? I haven't seen you in a while.
Wow.
Brian is this tremendous human being. All of them were, and Pat, all of them were great. That was Toy Matinee. I was, like I said, I was honored to be in there, and I brought some things to it maybe, but I always try to make that stipulation that the credit where credit's due, man, and Tim, phenomenal to this day, he's phenomenal player. So.
Yeah, well, that's nice of you to say all that too, because it is important to have that out there, and I love the band, and I loved the performance, and I had to ask you about that. I got one last question for you, and you can wax on until you feel like you just want to stop,
or wax off.
Wax off. Yeah. What is some of the advice you'd give to an up and coming musician that aspires to have a long career as a performance, guitarist, or touring? What is some of the advice about how to get along with others, about networking yourself, you know what I mean, philosophically too?
Well, I think that one, you always want to try and be the solution to someone's problem, never the source. Real important. I learned that in soundtrack writing, in movies and band stuff. Whatever band I was in, I always wanted to create, you want to create a dependence for your goodwill. In other words, I tried never to create a problem. If there was an issue that I had, I would try solve it on my own, whatever that happened to be, or I would figure out some way to circumnavigate the issue without agitating somebody. I didn't want to be the prima donna in the band, any of that stuff. And that holds true to this day. So being a solution as opposed to a problem is a very important thing, because people will then get a feel of who you are and going, oh, yeah, like Greg Bissonette, one of the sweetest guys on the planet. And one of the reasons beyond his extraordinary abilities as a drummer is his personality. He's always positive. He's always uplifting. He's always validating. Every time that I play with him, I feel better than I am. In other words, he's just vibes everybody in the band, so you just want to play with him because you want to look forward to the endorphin rush, and there's several guys like that. Lee Sklar is like that. Thomas Lang is like that. I can think of a million, of these, not a million, actually, no, I won't say that, but there are several of the people I play with. That's why I do this. And I've never wanted to, and this is another thing, is never involve yourself in a project where you feel subtracted from when you leave its presence. You must always feel added to. And that goes true with your friends, any of that stuff. Don't put yourself through that. It doesn't matter how much money you're making. It will take a piece of your soul. So you always, I made that decision a long time ago that I didn't want to do anything where I felt like I'd been siphoned out spiritually. I always wanted to feel like that was great. That was a great thing. It was an uplift. Everything was an uplift. That keeps the modicum of fun, because even if you've been doing this for a long time, and you're the reason for art, and you have to remember this, that art in and of itself, it's not just the creation of art that's art. It's the creation of art in spite of all of the elements that are seemingly conspiring against you creating that art, whether it's financial, whether it's relationships, whatever it is, if it's gear, money, any of that stuff. Things will work against you. They worked against Michelangelo. He wanted to paint. He didn't want to paint the Sistine Chapel, but he had the bishops, and the cardinals yammering him to the point that he drew one of them in hell on the Sistine Chapel.
Did he really?
Yeah, his face is in hell. Yeah, yeah. But what I'm saying is, this is an age-old issue. Where no matter what composer, whatever, there's always limitations. Whether you can you have the gear to do it, whether you have the finance to do it, whatever it is. Your creation ultimately is done in spite of all of those elements that are pushing against you to do it. And that's what the real art is. It isn't just creating art in a vacuum. You'll never have that. You'll always have these issues as a musician, especially. You'll have band members that are working against you, whatever it is. Try to surround yourself with like-minded people that love it like you do. It'll be worth the effort to search them out. And when you're doing these things, also learn to, if you don't scare yourself once a day, you're not really growing. And you need to, like what David Bowie said about going out, a good place to be is out in the ocean, far enough where your toes barely touch the sand. So you have a little contact, but that wave can pull you, and the swells can make you go places that you normally wouldn't go. That's a wonderful adage, and you have to do that. You have to achieve, and you'll get people saying, no, it's a brutal business, all this. That has nothing to do with it, because you have a call. If you have a calling, that's what it is. It doesn't matter. The calling doesn't care about extraneous circumstances. The calling is the calling. The things that you have, the ideas you have in your head, those things that bark at you at night, that repeat on a loop. Those are people calling you to express. They don't care about your financial situation. They don't care about your political climate. You need to get that stuff out, because you have a little truth gland in here that resonates when you're on your life's path. If you're not on your life's path, you're working a day gig, where you think you have to make ends meet. I get that. I did the same thing, but I knew I wasn't on the right path. It resonates when you're on the right path. In other words, when you walk on a tightrope, and you have that balance beam, right? When it's right in the middle, you can feel when you're right on balance, and you don't have to compensate with weight. That's when you know you're on your life's path. And don't compromise. In other words, take a piece of a match, light the tightrope behind you, so the only way you can go is forward. Don't be looking for exit signs, any of that shit. Focus is what it takes, and you're going to get things that are going to try and pull you off. It doesn't matter. Do not be afraid to fail. If I put a curb, if you walked on a curb, and you can easily walk on a curb, you can walk on a curb, right? There's no problem. If you take that curb and you make a big wall out of it that goes up 500 feet, you think you could walk across that thing? No. And let's say there's no wind shear, there's no nothing else. It's the same thing. You'd be really hard pressed to walk across it. What's the difference? The only difference, not physiological, not physical, it's the same distance. The only thing is your fear of failure is what'll fuck you up. That'll make you lose your balance. It's going, what if I fall? What if I fall, right? But when you're on a curb this high, you don't give a shit about falling. It'll hurt for a minute. So you have to understand that you always want to bring that wall down to the size of a curb. Don't worry about it. Just go across it. You know you can. The only person that's going to defeat you is you. And if you can establish victory over that, no one else can defeat you. If you can establish victory over yourself, that's your hardest enemy right there. And always steer into your skid, like be adventurous, take chances, but at the same time, you got to, find a way to make sure the car doesn't overturn. And ride it then, and then go on to the next adventure, because that's it's all waiting for you, But don't be afraid. Fear will kill anything. If you can get rid of that, you're good to go.
Damn, Mark, I think you should have a podcast.
Oh, there's plenty of those.
No, man. No, that was. I've enjoyed this interview probably more than most I've done. This is
Thank you.
Seriously, just
They're
listening
good questions,
to you.
though. You know,
Well,
it takes two people to have a conversation.
you know what might be the hardest
Know.
part of the podcast for me is that took me a while
Yes, I know.
it took me a while to get there.
I know.
But you, no, the way you think, I just love the way you think, man. That's awesome. It's just
It's
really
just
awesome,
it's just seeing things. You know, I
you know.
mean, I've been very fortunate to have surrounded myself with the players and the friends that I have. I never take it for granted. Every day I thank God for it. You know, that I've been able to get as far as I have. And I'm not world famous or any of that stuff, but I've never suffered from creative poverty. I've never suffered from any of that stuff. I've never suffered from lack of appreciation by my peers. I've been fortunate enough I've been respected by them, and that's great. I mean, you can't ask for anything more than that. These guys are all, and girls, are all tremendous
Yeah,
artists
yeah,
and beautiful friends that you can hang afterwards, you know, and it shows when you get on stage. It shows what your relationship is, you know, and if you're having fun on stage, then it spreads like wildfire to the crowd. You know, they know you're having a good time up there, and you're having a good time because you just hung together, you know, before and after. You can't underestimate the value of friendship in this business. It's really important. It'll get you through your tough times, and there'll be tough times, but those times are there for you to learn. Embrace everything. You know, it may not seem it at the time, but you always live life looking forward, but you always only can understand it by looking backwards. So you might as well go forward.
I just want to thank you again, especially since you're out there working, for taking the time to talk to me, and much luck in the future. And I'm sure we'll be in touch at some point.
Well, listen, yeah, it was a pleasure, and thank you for intelligent questions and all that. Letting me rant for a couple of hours.
Take care, my friend. If you like longer podcasts that are a bit more in depth with some of my guests, please let me know. You can connect with me on my website, gigwithmikeredman.com, or on Facebook, Instagram. I'd love to hear from you. Take care.